hand for the band. 4 of you are happy about that. That's great. Chip, great job tonight. Good job. Best student I've ever had in music. And Aloysius, I'm going to call you Al because that's how I know you. But I know I think we've got your tweet handle coming up on screen somewhere. And it's going to come up. There he is, right there. Democratic Alliance South Africa, Mmusi Maimane. That's him. And I want you to follow him on Twitter and Instagram. Is that your Instagram name as well? I think it is, isn't it? You don't know?
I wouldn't know it personally, but my wife is forever on Twitter. Oh, okay. On Instagram.
Okay. Well, listen. What I've got, Al, is I've got 10 rapid questions. These are one or the other. Okay. You don't have to think about these. This is sort of gut feel. Now, some of these questions, our friendship is dependent upon the answer, basically. Whether or not you'll ever be back here in Manchester and be welcome will depend on how you answer some of these. For example, how's this for a good one? Manchester United or Manchester City?
Man City.
Don't boo him. Don't boo him. That's terrible. Okay.
I don't support either of the two teams, by the way, but I'm glad.
What a good political answer that was. Can you believe that? Now, listen, we want straight answers tonight, okay? Straight answers, straight to the point. So, Cocoa Pops or cornflakes?
Cornflakes.
Rugby or football?
Football.
Pasta or pizza?
Pizza.
England or Wales?
Wales. My wife's from Wales.
End of interview? Is that it? We're done? Manchester or London?
Manchester, of course.
I got to tell church, I was speaking at Hillsong London at the end of January, and at the start of every session, I got up on stage and I said, it's great to be in England's second city. And it was awesome, got booed by every session. Okay, hip-hop or R&B?
R&B.
Nando's or KFC?
Nando's any day.
Okay, here's a good one. Last question. It all comes down to this. Pastor Brian Houston's watching this live stream. Hillsong music or Audacious music?
That's an easy one. Audacious music, of course, I'm here.
We love you. Okay, Al, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background. Where were you born? A little bit about your upbringing, so we can just get a picture of who you are.
Yeah, I was born in Soweto, which is Southwest Township, south of Johannesburg. I grew up there. My parents both still live there, and I studied in Soweto. In the 80s, when I grew up, South Africa was in a place where, because of apartheid, black kids could live in one space and white kids could live somewhere else. So that's where I grew up. I grew up to an average home. My parents both still work the same jobs they've done. And so I studied there, and then I lived there, and then commuted between Johannesburg to study in high school, did a degree in psychology, and 2 master's degrees, one in theology and one in public administration. So that's kind of where I come from. Yeah.
Right.
No.
And any siblings at all?
In it?
Any siblings, brother, sister?
Yeah, I've got 2. I've got to remember this. No. I've got two. Where am I lost? I've got two sisters and one brother. So all of them are all younger than me. My sister works for the South African police, so she keeps us all in line. My younger brother's just gotten married, so he's trying to find his way. And my little sister, my most little one, she's just started university. So that's the family.
Great. Yeah. And also, you're now married. You're married, been married 10 years. Tell us a little bit about your family, your wife, and your kids.
I'm married to a beautiful half Welsh girl from. You see, there we go. And we've got 2 little kids, KG and Daniel. KG is my daughter, Khalaletso. She's the most beautiful girl you will ever meet. I'm telling you that today. And the only reason I'm involved with politics is because you get security, and so I can send her on dates with good-looking men who will look after her as well. So, and then I've got a son, he's 2. I think he's joined the equivalent of UKIP in South Africa, so he seems to be doing all right. And my wife, Natalie, she just finished preaching at our other Sunday night campus tonight, and so she hopefully will be watching this live. So my love, hello, and good evening.
Come on, why don't we wave to Natalie all the way in Joburg. Natalie, we love you. So good. And Natalie, I don't know if you've noticed, but your husband is wearing pink and purple socks
Yes.
on stage.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that is awesome. Okay. What age did you become a Christian? And tell us about the growing awareness that you had of God during that time. What was the process by which you kind of came to faith?
I went to a Catholic primary school when I was growing up, and part of it is that I had a grandmother who had a very strong belief that we needed to be in church every weekend. So that kind of was our story. And then when I was in high school, I was about 12 when I went to this youth camp. And at this youth camp, one of the themes was about sport and all of that. And I felt at that point, it was my last youth camp I ever been to. And I responded to a compelling invitation to say, you needed to give your life to Christ. Despite all of your religious background, you all had to come to a decision. It was at that point that I made a choice to say I would follow Christ. And right through that, I'd volunteered the following year to say I'd come back to the same youth camp as a youth leader. And it was through just being able to lead and serve that deepened my own walk with God, because it kind of gave me an opportunity to say, hey, look, if God can use someone else, God can use me. And I started getting involved with it. That took us a number of years. And then when I finished school, I had a year kind of to waste, if I could say that. I was 16 when I finished school, and I couldn't drive, I couldn't go to university at that point. And so because in South Africa, you can only drive when you're 18 and to start. So I thought I'd do a year where I could volunteer for a youth organization. It was in that year I felt a deep call of God to say, get involved in a local church. And since then, that's kind of, I got involved then, and it rescued me, because when I was in matric, I was really good with numbers, and I thought to myself I'd become an accountant. And if it wasn't for that year, having spent in volunteering at a church, I might have been sitting here today wearing gray socks as opposed to these psychedelic pink ones. So yeah, that's been my journey in terms of in my own faith and getting involved in our church since then.
And obviously, you're full-time. Well, are you full-time? You're pastoring in a church, Liberty Church, and your senior pastor, DJ, is one of the trustees of our church here in Manchester. And you're doing that. You're leading a campus of Liberty Church, but you're also in politics as well, which is a crazy, crazy thing. Just tell us a little bit about how did you feel called to go into, I guess, full-time church work, to become a pastor of a church? What happened? Was there a moment, or was there a gradual awareness that you knew you wanted to be involved in church?
Yeah, I mean, one of those things, you kind of grew up with that sense. I always thought, because my grandmother was such a strong influence in my life, I thought I'd become a Catholic priest instead. And then I discovered that it's not, I thought, I was just going to go. So thank you, Stuart. He rescued me right there.
It's not good for a man to be alone. Is that what you're about to say?
Yeah,
Okay.
So I'm glad I then got married to a beautiful girl, and we both...
Which ruined the Catholic priest thing for you, didn't it? Okay.
And then we felt for both of us at that time that we needed to serve in our church on a full-time capacity. After having done a year of my life, I did that, and we had a really great youth ministry. In fact, I thought it was doing really well. And then after that, I was preaching at another church, and during the altar call, I felt an invitation. I said, look, I feel there's a young person here. You've been running away from your call of politics, and God tonight wants to reaffirm that and just assert. And just as I was sharing that word, I was standing on stage and no one was responding, right? And it was a bit weird, so I got a bit desperate. So you start asking, is there anyone with a headache? And but at the end of that evening, we had a great time. And then I got in the car, and my wife kind of looked at me and said, I think that young person was you. So I didn't want to argue with her, for it's not good for a man to argue with his wife. It was not wise. So we drove home that night. And I kind of couldn't shake away that feeling. I couldn't shake away that invitation. I felt really a deep sense that that's what God was calling us. And I didn't really even have I had been involved politically before when I was living in Soweto. At this point, I'd been serving in an NGO. I'd been serving in church. I didn't think I'd wanted to do a full-time public work. And then I studied my second degree because we thought we needed to prepare. And then off we went along the journey. And as I was doing that, I kind of felt I wasn't wanting to be a public servant. I wanted to be an administrator and work in government and do that. And then I went to a community where these women were digging up their own toilets, and I thought that can't be right. And that birthed in me something that said we needed to do something about justice. So I stood for our ward councillor at that time for our own region. Subsequent to that, then I stood as mayor of Joburg, and then after that moved on to standing as governor for the whole province. Yeah? No? And since then, the journey has led me now to serving in parliament as leader of the opposition. So what really is great is that I don't feel I split my time between church and that. I really sense everything is spiritual, and so every single day I get to fulfill that. So that's what I'm doing.
So why don't you tell us, what's your current role in the political party, in the DA, Democratic Alliance? What do you do?
We've grown now to just over 22%. And in Parliament, that means we've got 89 MPs. And of those 89 members of Parliament, we've got the National Council of Provinces. So you've got two houses here, we've got similar. That brings us to about 103 members of Parliament in total, and that's the team I get to lead in Parliament. And along with that, that means the majority of my work is really about saying, how do we represent the 4.5 million South Africans who voted for us as a start? And then secondly, how do I ensure that we grow that voter presence? How do we ensure that we hold the current government to account? How do we grow and we track polls every day, so I have a vague idea where we are. How do we grow that base so that one day we could be the government in place? So that's my job is really to make sure that accountability is effected and that South Africans are represented, and then we could grow to become government. So that's the work I do.
So that's the journey you're on. And how has your and Natalie's life changed? So you've gone from being a pastor in a locality to now you are recognizable by, you gave me a stat before.
Yeah, 7 out of every 10 South Africans at this stage
would recognize you, ask for a selfie and things like that. So how has that changed your life?
Well, for one is, I used to always think that, those guys who walk around shopping centers with sunglasses and hats, I just used to think that is so cheesy, give it a miss, Whereas now we're finding we have to be careful about which shopping centers we go to, which events we go to. It's had security implications for us, so now we have to be conscious about, we have security briefings. So if I wanted to go to an event as an argument, sometimes it just means that we've got to plan ahead, make sure that we know where we're going to go. So that's had one implication. And in a campaign season, that even intensifies that we end up having security permanently all the time. So that's been quite tricky. We've separated the media interest in our lives means that nothing can be hidden. So if anything even that happens in our church, anything that happens anywhere else becomes public news. So we're very conscious about all of that. Our kids, we've stayed away from any media presence, so we separate them altogether. And equally so, because South African Parliament, the executive is in Pretoria, which is in Johannesburg, near Johannesburg, in the central part of the country, and the Parliament is in Cape Town. And there's a 2-hour flight in between that. It just means that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm in Cape Town doing that, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm back in Johannesburg. So our relationship, just even as a family, has had to change how we operate, what routines we get into, what kind of schedule we have in place. So sometimes Natalie will hear from my PA, who will then phone her up and say, listen, you have an event on Thursday night, this is the dress code, this is that. Because if she left it up to me, I'd arrive on Thursday afternoon and say, are you ready for tonight? And she'd be like, what are we talking about again? So we've had to have other people manage our own home as equally so.
What about your vision for South Africa? You're obviously praying into this, you're thankful to God for the opportunity that He's given you, the pros and the cons that go along with that. What would you say is your vision for the nation?
I really have a dream for South Africa to be a prosperous nation. And by that, I really mean that has to be reflected in its economic growth. South Africa's prospect at the moment is 1.4%, which is not good enough. So we want a nation that's prosperous. I want a nation that is economically inclusive. So in other words, those who are left out of the economic cycle. In South Africa, that is also a racial conversation in that wealth and poverty are denoted on the basis of race. So we've got to build an inclusive economy. We've got to have, as South Africa, the education system that is empowering, so that makes sure that there's equitable access to education, but also the standard of education is good enough. One of the distinguishing factors in my life had everything to do with the fact that I got just a bit better education than even my friends, and I can see what difference that's made. Equally so, we want a safe community. South Africa cannot be characterized by being a place of violence. And so we've moved from a place where, even as that scripture in Isaiah speaks about the elimination of violence, and we're very clear that we want to not have a police force, but a police service that works with men and women. We want to make sure that those who've been left out of land and land opportunities can come in. I always believe in a healthy citizenship. So when we talk about the health of any community, it's not only just about what we do in hospitals, but it's about making sure South Africans are active, they're wealthy, and they're well. And that ultimately, true to the spirit in some ways of Nelson Mandela, I want a South Africa where black, white, Indian, and colored can feel that this is a home for them and a place where they can share their dreams. So that's that.
So I guess one of the questions that many people would have is how do you, in a nation where it was so entrenched, apartheid was so entrenched into the fabric of the society, obviously Nelson Mandela came in and, you know, brought in a season of forgiveness. How do you go about changing the fabric of a society to actually representing something different now?
Yeah. I mean, and it's part of the one I wanted to share tonight, is about our sense is that we, in the words of Gandhi, in many ways, you've got to be the change you want to see. So everything in our language and what we do, we always believe in non-racialism, and we speak it and we believe it. And we not only put economic policies that ensure that that is a reality. So we just talk about black and white South Africans being friendly to each other, but we want to bring economic plans that ensure that that is so. But furthermore, I have become more involved with dialogues that focus on this conversation about race, because I think sometimes South Africans sometimes have a famous saying that says, you know, we are so post-racial, I don't see the color of your skin. And I often say that's a dangerous place to be. I would hope that you'd be able, as much as I can see you're white and you can see that I'm black, I don't use either of those things as a form of oppression or some form of suppression. But I see that we're diverse, and I see that we're different, created by God. And so And that has a story, that has a history about it. It was God in his wisdom who decided that I would marry a white girl, end up with mixed kids, I suppose. And if we had to adopt an Indian child, we'd be complete as a family. It really gives us a great opportunity to be able to speak out of that place. And also, when many others want to stand for racism, because sometimes racism rewards certain people. It's easy in South African politics to say, if you are black, you vote for this party, and if you're white, you vote for that party. That's an easier task. The task that we engage with is, how do we say, as South Africa, for all South Africans, not just for this race or that race. So it's a project that needs ongoing work, and it's a project that opposes any spirit or any form of racism that takes place.
Fantastic. Two more questions for you. So two more questions. We've got our vision slide coming up here on screen. I just want to show you our vision. And you know it, we've talked about it before. Yeah. But our vision is to be a church that stops the traffic, numerically so large that we transform these 7 gateways: business, education, entertainment, sport, family and healthcare, media, politics, and spirituality, one person at a time. And the way we're going to do it is by demonstrating the extraordinary God, where God's placed us. If there are people here tonight who have got a heart for politics to get involved, how would you encourage them? How would you urge them? What would you say to them tonight?
To a large degree, getting involved in politics, I think politics has developed such a negative stigma about it because we see bad politicians. You see politicians who are corrupt. We see all of that. And in truth, I think politics, like any other industry, gives you an opportunity, if you understand the cause, to be able to effect it through legislated processes. Because in all fairness, if we want to deal with poverty, it'll take the church, it'll take businesses getting involved, but government has a very significant role in that. And I think politics, if you really had to look at saying, ask yourself the question, what aspects of society, what aspects of the world, as your vision articulates, do you want to influence and be able to change? You've got to be conscious about saying, if my dream is about eliminating poverty, well, how do we do that? What does it mean? How will I get involved? What laws do I need to change? And how do I govern in such a way to ensure that the resources are designed to give relief to people who are poor? And I think if there was someone here who sat down, like me that night, you said, I want to get involved in politics, I think it's a great vocation, it's a great opportunity, and it's an amazing place to be able to influence a nation. And I think the option is always available for anybody. And I think as a church, if I was to give testimony to the fact that we sat here at this conference, we got a prophetic word about going to South Africa and having a burden for a nation. We took up the call, we said we would go, we wouldn't know, and we went in there, and subsequent to that, I'm fulfilling the role that I am now. But it's because something was birthed here in the life of a church that gave us a vision for a nation that we could go and serve. So there's an opportunity here, right here.
So what year was that you came to Audacious Conference and God was really kind of stirring your heart?
In fact, the first time we came here, you weren't even in this building. It was at your old building. So it's that long ago. I can't remember the exact year. And then subsequent to that, we've been to a few other conferences. And then we came here when the first conference you had in this place.
When it was really hot?
Yeah, when it was boiling. We were here for that. And then we were here when Pastor Russell Evans came and preached here. And I even remember him speaking about just nation and Joseph and that spirit. And at that point, we'd been involved in politics, but there's something about sitting in an atmosphere that says to you, where you are at is the right track, you know?
Yeah, great. If we can just change tack, let me ask you one more question, and then we're going to kind of let you loose on our people. And the question is this: today is our Compassion Sunday, and we're encouraging as many people as possible to sponsor children in Rwanda. The next project that we're on is in Rwanda. We've been involved in Ethiopia, Uganda, and now Rwanda. Why, as an African, would you say it's important for us here in the United Kingdom to get involved in something like Compassion, sponsoring children and seeing change come to them?
Look, I mean, let me tell you my own story. I had both parents live with me, but the education system in South Africa was so unequal that my maths and science weren't ever going to be good. It took two white South Africans, who had a little bit more resource. And they said we would spend our Saturdays taking black kids in that instance and just give them an education. So they gave me extra lessons in maths and science and in English. So all three of those things combined meant that they could up my education levels and help. It was them investing their social capital. Two people who today, I can sit here today and say I sit here because they had an impact. So when 4 million people even vote for us, and even more, we were in Gauteng, we saw 64%, and we really brought the ANC, the governing party, to 53%. I can attribute it to them. And so you as a church, as you sit here as an individual, you can take a life of a child in Rwanda, be able to sow resource. And the beauty of currency is that pounds vis-a-vis, I'm not sure what Rwanda's currency is, but I know as a South African, 1 pound is 18 rand. And if you think about what the quality of education is, just at 10 pounds, you could radically change someone else's life significantly if you measure currency control. And so the really, really great news is that for each one of you, it is just an opportunity where it may not even radically impact your own life. It may not inconvenience your life radically. But I can assure you, by taking the life of one child, you can influence them. And it's not like, the age-old dream, who knows what could happen to the child? They could influence an entire country. But even if they influence just their family, in Africa, just one generation can be influenced by that child's life being changed. They could undo the history of their entire family for the glory of God. So it's a great opportunity.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm excited about just hearing his heart right now. We're going to come around the Word of God. So come on, why don't we stand up and welcome Mmusi as he comes to share the Word of God with us right now.
Fantastic. My goodness, I was scared. Pastor Glenn warned me about all the questions that were coming up. Man, I want to, in a short space of time, really just share just something that out of it impact. You know, when we came to Audacious Church, Pastor Glenn and Pastor Sophie, who's sitting right here, they've really just, their partnership with our church has been such a radical impact for us, and has really, I don't come here to church as a guest. So when tonight they were giving away free stuff, even though I love free stuff, it just comes with being South African. We just love the free stuff. I didn't stand up for that because we feel like this is home for us. We feel like this is a place where it's our maternity ward. We feel that so much was birthed in us out of this church that we don't have a choice but to feel like we're connected with what you're doing here. And here's the powerful thing, is that we sat right here, and I remember just that prophetic word saying, look, you could one day lead your nation. And Pastor Glenn kept saying to me, you could be the next president of South Africa. When he spoke, there was like, in South Africa, there's probably about just 20 million voters. So I thought, I'm 1 in 20 million. The chances of that are, when he spoke that word. And then the next time we came back, we then were starting to stand as public representatives. There must be about just over 1,000 public reps who signed up in South Africa. And I thought my chances were 1 in 1,000. And then when we came back the last time, I just signed up as a member of parliament, just starting up. I thought my chances are now 1 in 400. And then I came back now, and I sit here today. There's only 12 other political leaders in our parliament at the moment, so our chances are 1 in 12. So the next time, there could be less, right? Right? And I say that really to encourage you, because sometimes when we hear God's word, we can take it for granted. We can take it to mean, it's just so nice to have this prophetic word. But I want to tell you, the God who spoke the universe into being, when he speaks, I want to stand up and say, God, if you can do it, all things are possible. And so don't tonight ignore anything God places before you, if I can encourage you in that space. And the journey hasn't been easy. When we came here, we were expecting kids, and I somewhat, I don't know where I believe this from, but I always used to think I'll never ever have kids. And so when Natalie fell pregnant the first time around, we thought to myself, this is like a miracle. And so we came, and Natalie was pregnant, and we had the word at that time to say we wanted to serve our country. And so we wanted to call our son Daniel. And tonight I want to speak to you about just out of a word from Daniel. We thought we were going to have Daniel at that point. And then just a few weeks later, literally 12 weeks into the pregnancy, we went to the doctor, and the doctor looked at us and said, I can't feel a heartbeat. And we were devastated. Like, I thought to myself, firstly, I thought at that point my dreams had come true. That's a starting point. Second thing is I thought, but God, you gave us that word. How can you let us down like that? And the pain and the disappointment of that moment, I can remember when a couple of years later, Natalie fell pregnant again. Like, she was over the moon, and I was super cautious. We had a beautiful girl called KG. We called her Kalaletso, which is a Tswana word which says God's glory revealed. We called her that. And so at that point, I can remember the joy of holding my daughter, thinking to myself, this joy supersedes the pain of that moment. And then we had our son, who is now 2. And I realized that, you know what? When God plants something in your spirit, it's not always a straight line between here it is and then you'll get the dream. Sometimes you go through valleys, but in that point, God shapes something in you. For God's word is like a seed that comes in. Sometimes it has to die, but one thing I know is that the fruit that comes out of it is always greater than just the pain of its own dying. So, if I encourage you here today, I would start off at a point of saying, you might be sitting here and you might hold on to a dream, to some dream. I think it's important for me to set that foundation in place, because when I hear of a church that wants to stop traffic, I think to myself, that's quite frankly ridiculous. But who am I? I am not God. The beauty of it is that the dream to see traffic be stopped in Manchester so that this place is packed out with people coming to know Christ, there can can be no noble cause greater than that. And I want to say this to you. It might feel like a dream at this point, but I know, having watched what God has done in my life, that He is faithful to bring it to pass. That's the God we serve. So if it's true for your church, I don't know if it's true for your life. I wonder whether you might be sitting here saying, God, maybe for me is to see poverty eliminated in our street, poverty eliminated in our community. And you might think, where do I start? All I'm here to say this is that God's word is faithful. So if I was to title anything I'm going to speak to you tonight, is about saying, how do you become a person of influence? How do you become a person of influence? Because in truth, God, my thing is, and I love England, right? I love it because I think there's something about mission that comes out of this nation. And here's the thing, is that God has placed you on a mission trip. The fact of the matter is that many people say to me, but other people are missionaries. Those are the people we send to other distant nations, etc. If they are missionaries, that would make you a spectator. And I'm not certain that God has called you to be a spectator. What I'm certain of is that just by you going to your own workspace, whether that's being an accountant, whether that's being in education, whether that's being in the arts, whether that's being in politics, you're a missionary in that space. I don't go to politics and think to myself, I'm a politician, therefore I must behave like one. I think I am a child of the Most High God, planted in the house, a missionary in the world of politics. That's where it's at. You know, so how then do you become just a person of influence? If I can encourage you just with a few things. Let me just give you just some thoughts. First of all, is that influence is not about position, but it's about who you become. You see, many people think that I'll only become influential when I get a position. My wife does not worry too much about Parliament. She really doesn't. She watches it on television. But her influence over me is greater than our entire research team, all of the people who work, because you know, I think Pastor Glenn has told you before, she's more than a conqueror. She's just the truth. So her word to me, I can come home and her ability to influence me is greater than all our polls, on our research. And it's not because she has the position, it's because she's a person of influence. And so it's never about the position that you hold. Influence is ultimately about a separation from the place you're trying to fulfill, from trying to influence, to say, I'm a person of purpose sent into this place. Let me help you out. You can become a teacher, an average teacher, do your job, and just finish. At the end of your life, we'll be able to say, well, here was someone who taught. How do you become someone of influence? It's about saying, understanding that the greater purpose is to see God's purposes be fulfilled in the classroom. I separate myself to that purpose. I walk into the classroom and say, even though I'm teaching maths is not the destination. The destination is the purposes that God has brought for that place. Influence is about separation. Influence is not about the majority. Often people say to me, I've got to be in the majority to be influential. But actually, it's not even about the minority. To tell you the truth, the people who influence nations are few. We often think there must always be a congregation of people. I can tell you now about our own parliament. I can think about South Africa's own history. It took a few men who stood up and said, we want to stand for something. It took President Nelson Mandela standing up and saying, I believe in a non-racial society. When South Africa was heading to a civil war, he stood up and said, it's better for me to forgive than to go into a civil war. One person was able to transform an entire nation. So what does it mean for you? I really want to say this. What it really means for you is that as a starting point, don't often think you've got to congregate with the thousands and the millions. Be willing to stand up and say, God, if one person is willing to stand up, I will be that person. I will be that person. So how do people become people of influence? Let's just go quickly to Daniel chapter 2, which is, I told you why we named our son Daniel. It's because I wanted something to remind me every day about why God has called us to do what we do. It says this, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. This is his response in a prayer when the king is saying, Nebuchadnezzar is going to do certain things. He's wanting for someone to come and interpret a dream. And if you don't interpret it right, it's not like a multiple choice question, you die. Difficult. Daniel gets this invitation and he says this, blessed be God, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my Father. You've given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked you. For you have made known to us the king's demands. Here's his prayer. He prays after having heard this response to say, now he has to appear before the king. He knows he's taking a risk. He knows when he arrives and he gets this thing wrong, he's seen other people get killed. So he has a fine choice to get in. He's not in government, yet he has to influence the government. Him and his friends have gathered together. Now they go respond before the king. And he acknowledges a few things about God, which I think are important if you're going to be a person of influence. Number one is that you've always got to operate out of wisdom if you're going to be a person of influence. Now, God promises us one thing. He says, if you ask for wisdom, I will give that to you freely. It's one of the things that we can depend on almost all the time. Now, here's the thing. I often walk into Parliament and I think to myself, my goodness, I don't even know what we're going to do. Honestly, I think, what are we going to do now? Look at this situation. There was one night, MPs had got together in the middle of the thing and they wanted to have a full-on Barney. I know that might seem like, you know what a Barney is? It's when they have a full raucous. Would that be a good English word? So some MPs had a few things to drink and they thought they must come out and have a fight in the middle of Parliament. You have to make a decision as a leader as to how you calm this thing, and we had to vote on an important bill. And so I had an opportunity to step aside and say, God, I need your wisdom. I need your wisdom, for this situation isn't just going to take just common sense. It requires divine, supernatural wisdom. And then you have to sit back, pray, ask God and say, God, how do I bring wisdom in this situation? And I want to tell you something. Even with your government here, even with your communities here, one thing that they could do with is divine wisdom from God. And you have access to it. The power of influential people is that they operate out of a space of wisdom. They know and they understand their nations. They cry out to them and they cry out for their nations and they seek divine wisdom. The problems of Africa often are so complicated that we sit back and you can be defeatist. I come from a nation where 40% of the people live out of poverty. 40. 35% of South Africans cannot find work. It's a difficult situation. But one thing I do know is that even having studied macroeconomics, even having studied all of that, my deepest desire is to say, God, give us divine wisdom for our economy, because out of wisdom we can bring influence. Are you with me? So being a person of influence is about being a person that operates out of wisdom. Number two, and this is really for me one of the most important things, is that actually being a person of influence is being a person of convictions. Now, convictions are important things because not everyone is born. Convictions are some things that are birthed in us. We're not born with them sometimes. My kids cannot say and they stand up for this. They're still little. But when they get into, they may demand food, they may make some demands, and they certainly have protest in our house a lot of the time. I see this thing happening in our own house. But one thing I've come to see is that as they grow older, we've got to say to ourselves, God, birth in us some convictions. I might sit back and say, God, you know what? I need to have a conviction about race and race relations. Maybe I didn't have it before. But you know what? I say, God, what do you see for a nation about race relationships in South Africa? And I hold on to that as a conviction to say, actually, more than anything, I see a non-racial society. So it's a conviction I hold. You can't shake that off me. You can come and even try and sell me on crazy ideas about why separate race development is better. But I'm here to tell you one truth. It's a conviction so sealed in me by the power of the Holy Spirit that I'm not going to compromise on it, because it's a conviction. It's something that I wake up every morning thinking to myself, South Africa needs to be a place where all races live together. So here's the trick, is that you've got to be able to say to yourself, God, develop in me solid convictions. Because in truth, the Holy Spirit plants convictions. Convictions, with the power of your convictions, that they guide your decisions. In any area of influence, I've found that even in Parliament, politicians without convictions do what is convenient. But truth is, once you operate out of conviction, you say to yourself, this might not be the popular thing to do, but even if it's not popular, it is such a conviction, I'm willing to fight for it. Are you with me? What convictions do is they help you decide what is justice and an injustice. I can see a situation and say that's an injustice because you hold a conviction. You say, convictions are the things you fight through in the privacy of your own home and live out in a public life. Convictions are the things that help you through the fire. What do you think helped Daniel and his friends go through the fire? They'd spend some time quietly seeking God. And when the populist thing to do would have been just to simply kneel down before the statue, that's an easy thing to do. It was a populist thing to do. They had a conviction that their God would always stand. And so even if it meant they could lose their life through it, they weren't willing to betray their convictions. Are you with me? And so the power of this thing is that you've got to be able to settle in your own self. What are your convictions? What are you willing to fight for? Friends, the world that we live in will always ask you to trade your convictions. I found often, what I like about Daniel chapter 1 is that they go into the king's palace. They were forming their own convictions. They get there and the king says to them, you can have this diet or that diet. They choose a lousy, boring diet. That's just the never intended version. They choose a dreadful diet and they say, test us after 10 days. If we're smarter, wiser than all the other men, then you'll let us carry on with what we're doing. So they do this. It says Daniel and them separated them from themselves. And it says after 10 days, they were found that they were more wiser than all the other king's servants. Here's the profound thing I found, is that in their process of being separated, they developed a set of convictions that they thought to themselves, we can never, ever compromise on these things. But here's what conviction helps you to do. Conviction helps you say, you are pursuing a purpose, not a position. I find often people in public life, you can fall in love with the public trappings. There's a lot that comes with my job. And I really like some of that stuff. You get to be on TV a lot of the time. Isn't that cool? I think that's cool. Like, my wife never has to wonder where I am because she can just flip through the telly and be like, oh, that's who he is. Like, and we get a whole lot of other perks that come with the job. And I think sometimes leadership can invite you to say to yourself, can you fall in love with the perk and lose the fact that you have a cause to fight for? And so here's the thing. Whether they took away the perk, whether they took away the job, would you still be willing to fight for your convictions? Now, when President Nelson Mandela stood at the Rivonia trial, he said this to his team. He said this to the judge. They gave them the option. They said, you can decide whether you're going to have life sentence or not. Remember, the charge they were charged against was treason. Treason. And in that law, they could get convicted and be sent to die. So they decide with his friends to say, what are you going to say when you respond to that call? He gets up and he says the following words. He says, I have fought against black domination and I have fought against white domination. These are ideals to which I'm prepared to live for. But if needs be, these are ideals to which I'm prepared to die. Imagine making such a statement before a judge saying, even if this thing doesn't allow me to become a superstar, to be comfortable, to be all of this, I have such a deep conviction about this issue that I'm willing to lay down my life about it. People without influence generally don't have conviction. Out of conviction, the final thing, number 3, is that conviction births in you passion. Passion isn't about screaming. Passion is about sacrifice. Passion isn't about how loud you get to shout. Passion is about what you're willing to sacrifice. Let me help you one thing. When Jesus was on the cross of Calvary, that he was so passionate about you. So passionate. Yet it was the most agonizing thing. Yet his passion came through. You see, I look at people who want to serve, and I said to them, what do you want to do? I said to them, where's your passion? Because actually it's out of your passion that I can find what you're willing to sacrifice. It's not always easy being away from my kids. It's not always easy being away from my wife. I miss her a lot. But you know, both her and I take opportunities and independent of each other to say, God, we love our nation. And we're not putting our marriage at the altar of that as a sacrifice. We're simply saying, God, we'll pay the price. God, if you're looking for people to pay the price, we're those people. And you know, we work hard on our marriage. We work hard on raising our kids. We work on all of those things because we want at the end of it to still be a healthy marriage, healthy kids. I never want to put any of those things at sacrifice. But we recognize the fact that it's not easy. It comes at a price. But what we're clear about is that we love South Africa so much that we're willing to sacrifice. Friends, you see, here's the thing. If you're clear about the price, the sacrifice is easy. But if you are unclear about the price, the sacrifice is harder. And let me help you this. When Jesus was on the cross, it was not easy. But it's so that one day you and I can stand and serve Him. The price was clear, therefore the sacrifice was possible. If you are unclear about the price, the sacrifice becomes even harder. What is the price for me? As I shared with you, I want to see South Africa become the nation that it can be. I want to see South Africa be in the world. You know, as Nelson Mandela said in 1994, that no longer should we be the skunk of the world, and never again shall the sun set on this great, great moment. You know, I dream about that. And therefore I say, if that is the price, we want to pay the sacrifice. What is it for you? I guess the question that I would leave you with tonight is, you're not here as a spectator. You're here in a mission field. And I want to challenge you to say that perhaps maybe tonight, if you've heard anything, it's God saying to you, you need to move out of comfort to a place of discomfort. It's God saying to you that there's so much more that I've called you to do. Are you willing to be one of those that would say, God, if my inconvenience is putting away some money so that some child in Africa can get a decent education, well, so be it. Because the price of that life being so radically transformed is worth it. I'm willing to pay the price. Tonight, you might be saying, whatever it means. And you know what? I love your vision. Because it's straightforward. I love it. I love this church. And you know what our dream is? To say, God, this auditorium would never be enough. Never be enough. Because if we're to stop traffic, we've got to see Manchester and other nations in the world that you're consumed with come to know Christ. That's got to be the heart.